My name is Virginia Breskel Strasser. I'm 81 years old, born in 1932. I have 9 children, 21 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. So we're a big, happy family when we get together. My favorite child was number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All 9 of them were my favorite child.
You can't believe everything Bernie tells you?
A lot of them. A lot of that stuff I don't even remember or know that went on.
What's the funniest story you remember, Nan?
I'm probably the funniest part of all. Yeah.
Nanny.
Oh. And I was born at home on the farm. My parents had worked at the Ford plant, and when the Depression came and the Ford plant closed down, he couldn't find work. So they thought they'd come back then to the farm that my mom grew up on was for rent. So they thought they could rent it and at least have a garden and have food on the table. Irene was born in New Jersey. She was 2 years older than I was. And then I was born. So we lived on that Herndon farm for a year or two, and then we moved to the island across from Herndon. The Inches family lived there. They had 8 children, and then there was another farm that we lived on. One day, the Inches children came up and asked if they could take Irene and I for a boat ride. My mom said yes. They had gone down to the river, and Mom was peeling potatoes. Although she wasn't finished peeling, she thought she'll dump the peels out for the cows. And when she looked down to the river and she saw everyone standing there but me, so she ran down and saw me flopping around in the water, and she jumped in and pulled me out. She said I was already turning blue, but I was saved. We had a closed-in yard there, but if I got out of the yard, there was a big heavy rooster that put me down and stomp on my chest. I can still remember that. Then we moved off of the island in 1936, right before the flood. We got everything off except Mom's china closet, which still has the watermarks on it. And we moved to a farm in Red Cross that we rented from Isaac Tressler. So we lived there a couple of years, and Daddy had horses to use for the plow. At first he had 3 mules, but then he got 2 big stallion horses he would use in the fields. And so when we moved to the bigger farm in Herndon, I used to cultivate the corn with those 2 horses. My mom was always scared of me because she thought I couldn't hold the horses, and she would have been so right. If they decided to go, I'm sure I never would have held them. Then we soon got a tractor, and he didn't have to use the horses anymore. Well, while we were at the Red Cross house, Irene started school. She didn't want to walk to school. It was about a mile to walk to school. So my mom asked the teacher if I could walk to school with her. And he said, well, if I came, I'd have to be a student and be registered in a grade. They started me in 1st grade when I was 4 years old. And I didn't like to go to school either because the kids would tease us. There were only 2 girls that would talk to us because we were Catholic, and the others said they're not allowed to talk to us. We would walk down around the turn, sit on our lunchbox for a while, then maybe we'd eat our sandwich and we'd go back home. We'd think the day was over. So then Mom would have to take us to school anyway. But when we moved to the Herndon place, nobody teased us at school, and it was a much nicer group of kids. We never liked if we had to stay home to help with work in the fields or cleaning out the straw shed from the cows. We always had our chores. We had to get up and feed the chickens and water them, and then collect the eggs, and then feed and water the cows and help with the milking. So we had a good bit of work in before we went to school. We had a new teacher that came in, and he said, well, if you can pass the test, then you could go on, but if not, you'd have to repeat. Well, of course, I wasn't so good in arithmetic because I had started so young, and when I took the test, I failed, so I had to repeat 6th grade. We went on to high school. We walked down and got the bus where the old schoolhouse was. We went to Herndon High School. So for my last year, I went to Mockanoy Joint, which is in Dalmatia. Then Irene went into nurses training. Then my mom said, well, you'll follow Irene. It was do like Irene. And so 2 years later, I went into nurses training. And while I was in training, in my last year, then I met Emil. Sodality had a skating party. A girl that I worked with in pediatrics said she knew just the guy for me because she said he never swore, and neither did I. So she had introduced us at the skating rink. So then we started dating, and he only had his pickup truck. I don't know where my head was. Should have looked for a Cadillac. But so we were dating. Of course, my mom wasn't too happy when she found out. Well, at first I didn't realize how much older he was. And finally, when I did, well, then we had been dating for a while. Then I did break up. He had given me an engagement ring, but when my mom and dad were so unhappy about it, I thought, well, I can't do this. So I gave him the ring back. Then my roommate, Martha, had called him to ask him when he'd come up to see me if he'd bring a box of her things. He said of course he would. So then he called me to ask me if I'd have dinner with him one more time. Of course I would, because after we had broken up, but at the time then my mom wouldn't speak to me. I couldn't even tell her that we broke up because she wouldn't hear anything I had to say. So when he came and we went out to dinner, and then we decided that, gee, we thought we should have been together. And then we decided, why don't we just get married? And so when he took me home, we went in and told my parents, and my mom wouldn't listen. She just walked upstairs. And so we were going to just have a quiet little ceremony. But Daddy wanted to have his big Polish wedding. So we planned for the wedding. They put a platform outside for the dancing, and he had some couple guys with an accordion for music. They made the big dinner. It was on June 20th of 1953. And on that day, it was the hottest day of that summer, and the butter melted on the plates because we had the tables set up outside. Then we went away to the Poconos for a week. When we came back, we had our house. We wanted to finish painting and get new flooring in it, and so that's what we were working on when we came back. Then one by one the children came along. Ronnie was born April 3rd of 1954. Well, I thought she was the cutest baby there ever was, as every new mother does. When she was 15 months old, then Francis came along, but I still thought this was fine because I didn't have to go out and feed the chickens and milk the cows or work in the fields. So I thought it was just great taking care of the little ones. And then 2 years later, Teresa came along. All this time, Emil worked the milk business 7 days a week, get up at 2 or 3 in the morning, deliver the milk, then go to the farms and bring it in. Ronnie was ready. She was making her first communion, and then Emil finally took off on Sundays, and that was great. I thought he'd be around on Sundays. Well, he decided he liked to play ball. When he came home, of course, he had to go to bed and sleep for a few hours because he had to get up early in the morning. So I didn't see too much of him. Of course, we wanted a son. Before we knew it, Eddie arrived, to our surprise, and that was a happy day. 2 years later, Lisa came along, and so as they got bigger, they helped me with the little ones. After Lisa, then there came Bernie, and Bernie decided to come a month early. I had a placenta previa. I began hemorrhaging, and he was born and weighed 5 pounds. He had a difficult start. When Bernie was 5 years old, he came down with a high temperature. So I got him out to the ER, and I laid him on the table, and he went into a big convulsion. Then they had to admit him, and I had to leave him there. Back then, you didn't stay with the kids, so I came home. Well, I had all the others at home too. When he was discharged a day or two later, it was like he was real mad at me. And we came home, and he takes the cereal box and he just dumps the whole thing out. It was like he was real naughty and did all that stuff as though you weren't there. It just seemed to me, you know, that he wanted your attention, I think. But, well, that was too late because that's how the things, you know, happen. And 2 years after Bernie, then Timothy came along. Well, after Timothy, I was home for a week, my second C-section, I came down with a serious kidney infection, glomerulonephritis they called it. So I was back in the hospital for a week. I came out, and was that week that I had to make half of the bed and sit down before I had enough energy to make the other half. But our Timothy was Eddie's pride and joy. He just loved that little boy. And then the time Tim fell off the picnic table, has a big gash in his head. I bring him in here, I'm holding him, and I take my hand away to, the blood spurts out. Lisa's standing here and she faints. She was 6 years old then.
Oh my
and I
gosh.
thought, here I had the 2 kids. I had to take him out for stitches then. I don't know how I handled, well, the other kids were around to help, but Emil wasn't here. He was either out playing ball or out on the milk route or collecting or, you know. So 2 years after Timothy arrived, then Patty arrived. She also was a C-section. When she was a year old, she came down with meningitis. She was vomiting one day, and I had taken her. I had called the doctor, then he said I'd better bring her out to the ER. When I got there, regular intern was in the emergency room, and he said he gave her a shot of penicillin and that I was to go home. But doctor saw me in the hall, and he said, oh, he says, well, I didn't see the baby. And he said, I think we better keep her. So they admitted her, and it was a good thing because at 3 in the morning she spiked a temperature of 105. She had meningitis. So she was in the hospital a couple days. Thought maybe there'd be brain damage or something there, but apparently there wasn't any. Then to our surprise, 2 years later, I found that I was expecting my 9th child. Eventually Virgie arrived through C-section again. Of course, she was a little darling. As the children got older, Emil had them help with his delivering the milk, and he would get them up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then they would go with him to finish delivering part of the route. Of course, none of them liked it. I didn't like it either, but that's the way things were. On Saturdays, we'd have Emil with his truck going out, and the GMC with one of the girls driving and one of the other ones going along. And then I would take the car and go to a different section of the city to do the collections. And I wasn't too happy about that, but there wasn't much we could do.
Did you do the spanking or did it pop up?
Well, he would go after them with that razor strap. So eventually I hid that strap so he wouldn't find it. Well, because he would get radical with them. And the girls were in the band. The 3 girls were in the band and in Catholic High. All of the children went to Lancaster Catholic High. So that kept me busy transporting back and forth. But sometimes they even walked home from there. Quite a long walk, but it was doable. Then eventually I went back to work at Village Vista. I thought I could do 3 to 11. I was going to do 2 nights a week, but my legs were hurting. It was pretty hard for me to be on my feet for 8 hours, and I'd get up in the morning with tears flowing down my cheeks. I had hurt my back and decided I couldn't be at the nursing home because you sometimes had to lift the patients if they fell. So I left there and I got a job doing insurance exams, which I could go to the homes and record what I had to. Then we had to learn to do phlebotomy, which I wasn't so happy about. But if I wanted the job, I had to learn to draw blood because then we were taking blood samples from the patients as well. Then I saw in the paper there was an ad for a phlebotomist in a chiropractor's office. And I thought, oh, I could do that, and then I wouldn't have to do this running because you had to go to the patient's home, and sometimes it was down at the Buck or way down. So I answered the ad for Dr. Sickman, and he hired me to do phlebotomy and take the blood samples for him so that he could suggest the supplements they would need, who was very nice to work for. And I spent 13 years working for him. Then he gave me a chiropractic treatment. I had 2 treatments, and my legs stopped hurting because I had a rotated pelvis, which he corrected. And that was the end of my leg pain after all of those years. And when I went to the family doctor, they told me it was all in my head. I was imagining it. And so the family was growing up. Emil joined the Liederkranz, and he would go down on Friday nights to sing with the German group, and he enjoyed that so much. Of course, that didn't include me, but we did go to the dances, and that did give us more of a social life. Then when they moved the Liederkranz up to Mount Joy, well, then we had to travel up there to go, but he went every Friday, and we'd go to the dances on Saturday nights. And it was a lot of fun. Then we had Ronnie got married, then Fran got married. Well, Fran had Angie, and then they had Laura. By that time, Terry had gotten married and had Sheila, and she and Tom lived in the house next to me and rented the first floor apartment. One night, Tom went out. He was shot. There Terry was, a young widow. Sheila was 8 years old. So that was a hard time to get over. And one by one, the girls were getting on with their lives, and that's my story. Yeah, I guess it does make a good story. But